In the sun-scorched expanse of the new American West, empires are no longer built with railroads and cattle, but with silicon and code. Yet, the land remains the same, vast, unforgiving, and quick to reclaim what is built on sand. This is a story of a frontier spirit, a devastating betrayal under the endless desert sky, and the tale of a woman who, after being cast into the wilderness, learned its harsh lessons to become more formidable than the men who tried to erase her. It wasn't the fall from the canyon's edge that would shatter her world. It was the slow, agonizing realization that the man she loved had been pushing her, metaphorically, for years. The final, physical shove would only be a formality. Ilara Finch lived a life painted in the impossible colors of an Arizona sunset. Her world, from the outside, was a masterpiece of modern success. At 27, she was the quiet, gravitational center of Prescott Industries, a technological titan rising from the desert floor of Viridian Springs. While others saw a city of sprawling golf courses and glass towers shimmering in the heat, Ilara saw a network of pure data, a living circuit board of human desire and market trends. She was not merely a programmer, she was an artist, and her medium was the invisible language of the future. Her fiancé, Corbin Prescott, was the company's public face, the charismatic sun king to her hidden moon. He was handsome, in the way of a seasoned rancher's son, broad shoulders, a smile that could disarm senators, and the easy confidence of a man born to inherit the world. To the public, they were the ultimate Western dynasty reborn. His frontier ambition, her intellectual gold. They graced the covers of tech magazines, their love story, a perfect narrative of brains and bravado building a new legacy in the desert. Corbin, however, was more than just a charming heir. He was a man locked in a silent war with a ghost, the towering mythic figure of his father, Orson Prescott. Orson had carved Prescott Industries out of the dust with ruthless genius, and his shadow fell long and cold over everything Corbin did. Corbin didn't just want to run the company, he needed to conquer it, to reshape it in an image so grand it would finally eclipse his father's. He saw Ilara not just as his partner, but as the key, the divine instrument to his ascension. For 3 years, in a secure lab she called the Observatory, Ilara had poured her soul into Aetherius. It was a predictive analytics AI, so revolutionary it felt less like code and more like consciousness. It could read the whispers of the global market with near-perfect clarity, a digital oracle that would make Prescott Industries not just a leader, but a god. It was her life's work, a symphony of logic and intuition she believed would secure their future together. Corbin called her his secret weapon, a term that once made her heart flutter but had lately begun to feel like the brand on a prized mare. The red flags were there, subtle as the scent of rain on dry creosote. There were the late-night meetings he claimed were with venture capitalists, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper when she entered the room. There was his newfound, almost fraternal closeness with Serafina D'Amico, the fiery, brilliant daughter of a rival corporate patriarch from the East Coast. Serafina was everything. Ilara was not a creature of boardrooms and power plays, her ambition a sharp, glittering jewel. "She's business, Ilara. You're my life," Corbin would murmur, dismissing her concerns with a practiced kiss to her temple. "Aetherius is our legacy. Ours." His reassurances were a balm, but a thin one. She felt a growing dissonance, the sense of a deep, foundational crack running beneath the perfect surface of their lives. He loved her, she was sure of it. But sometimes, when he looked at her, she didn't see a lover. She saw a prospector gazing at the richest vein of gold he had ever found, a look of pure, possessive hunger. He was terrified of anyone else finding it, and even more terrified of the gold running out. He proposed a week ago, on the anniversary of the day she'd solved Aetherius's core algorithm. The diamond, a flawless emerald cut from a famed jeweler, felt heavier than stone. It felt like a claim, a final seal on their partnership. To celebrate, he announced a surprise trip a weekend to unplug in the remote, rugged wilderness of Sentinel Canyon. "Just us and the stars," he'd whispered, his voice a low, convincing purr. "One last breath of peace before the world goes crazy over what you've built." The phrase hung in the air. What you've built, not we. The possessiveness she had sensed was gone, replaced by an odd, almost clinical detachment. But she dismissed it as exhaustion. They were on the verge of everything they had ever dreamed of. She allowed herself to be swept up in his enthusiasm, in the romantic vision of being alone with him, surrounded by the raw, ancient beauty of the desert she loved. She chose to ignore the cold knot of dread in her stomach, mistaking the feeling of being caged for the security of being loved. The helicopter was a steel dragonfly, its blades beating a rhythmic pulse against the vast, ancient silence of the Arizona wilderness. Below them, the landscape unfolded like a topographical map, brought to life a panorama of jagged peaks, deep crimson canyons, and valleys painted in the muted greens of juniper and sage. Elara leaned against Corbin, the thrum of the engine vibrating through her, a mechanical heartbeat against the wild pulse of the earth. She was trying to hold on to the romance of the moment, to the simple truth of his arm around her, but the knot of unease had followed her into the sky. They landed in a secluded meadow miles from any trail, a patch of impossible softness in a world of stone. As the sun began its slow descent, bleeding hues of fire and violet across the horizon, they hiked. The air grew thin and cool, carrying the scent of pine and dry dust. Their destination was a scenic overlook Corbin knew, a place he called Sovereign's Crest. In retrospect, the name was not an irony, but a chillingly honest declaration of intent. They stood at the edge of the precipice, a sheer drop of over 500 feet to the rocky, serpentine riverbed below. The wind, a constant, invisible force, whipped her hair across her face, tasting of distance and solitude. "Isn't it beautiful?" Elara breathed, leaning her head on his shoulder. The world felt raw and elemental here, stripped of all pretense. "It feels like we're the only two people in the world." "We are," Corbin said. His voice was strangely flat, the warmth she was used to utterly absent. The arm that had been around her waist tightened, not in an embrace, but with the subtle pressure of a restraint. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced a path down her spine. "I need to tell you something, Elara." She turned to look at him, a flicker of unease, finally igniting into genuine alarm. The loving warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness she had never seen before. It was the look of a stranger. It was the look of a man appraising an asset. "Corbin, what's wrong? You're scaring me." "The D'Amico deal is closing tomorrow," he said, ignoring her question. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, as if discussing a quarterly report. "Serafina's father is investing 9 figures. It's a merger, really. Prescott D'Amico Global." That's amazing," she stammered, confusion warring with a dawning horror. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Because there were conditions," he continued, his gaze unfaltering as it finally met hers. It was like looking at polished river stones, a union of families, not just companies. "Serafina and I are to be married next month." The world tilted on its axis. The roar of the wind was suddenly deafening, the solid ground beneath her feet feeling like shifting sand. "What are you talking about?" "We're engaged." She held up her hand, the flawless diamond mocking her, a glittering monument to a lie. A humorless smile touched his lips, a slight, cruel curve. That was a necessity, a way to keep you focused, to ensure Aetherius was finished on schedule, to ensure you felt secure enough not to shop your work around. The pieces crashed into place with a brutal, devastating clarity. The hushed calls with Seraphina, the calculated distance, the lie of his love, all of it a meticulously crafted performance. Aetherius, she whispered, her voice cracking. My project, you're taking my work. I'm securing my future, he corrected, his tone devoid of any emotion. He was finally being honest, and the honesty was more terrifying than any lie. My father built an empire, Ilara. He never once let me forget it was his. Orson Prescott's son can't be a footnote to his brilliant fiancée. The world needs a visionary, not the man who married one. The official story will be that I developed Aetherius alone, in secret. You, tragically, will have had an accident. Tears streamed down her face, a hot mix of heartbreak and pure, primal terror. Corbin, you can't. I won't let you. She took a desperate step back, her heel catching on a loose stone at the very edge of the precipice. He lunged forward, not to steady her, but to seize the opportunity. His hands were firm on her shoulders, his grip like iron. You were always too trusting, Ilara, he said, his voice a low, final judgment. It's your greatest weakness. He looked past her for a moment, a flicker of something crossing his face. It wasn't regret. It was impatience. A problem being solved. Goodbye, he said, as if discussing a cancelled dinner reservation. And then he shoved. For a single, heart-stopping second, she was suspended in the air, a weightless silhouette against the dying Sunday. Her scream was swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness, the sky, the blood-red rocks, and Corbin's cold, triumphant face spun in a sickening vortex. Then gravity took hold, pulling her down into the waiting darkness. The impact with the first rocky ledge was a blinding explosion of pain, a supernova of agony. She tumbled, a broken doll crashing against unforgiving stone, the world fracturing into a million shards before, finally, mercifully, fading to black. Above, on Sovereign's crest, Corbin Prescott adjusted the collar of his jacket. He took one last, brief look into the abyss where the woman he'd sworn to love had vanished, then turned and walked back toward the waiting helicopter without a second glance. The sun had set. His legacy was secure. Pain was the first architect of Ilara's new reality. It was a searing, all-consuming force that stitched her back to consciousness, one agonizing thread at a time. She awoke not to a place, but to a state of being. Torment. The smell of pine needles and damp earth filled her lungs, each breath a battle against what felt like shattered ribs. One leg was bent at an angle that defied nature, a grotesque sculpture of bone and flesh. Her world had been reduced to a symphony of agony. For days, she drifted in a delirium of pain and fractured memories. The image of Corbin's face, the cold impatience in his eyes, was a more constant torment than her broken body. She survived on the most primal, unyielding refusal to die. She licked rainwater from the waxy leaves of a scrub oak that sheltered her. She watched the sun move across the sliver of sky visible from her crevice, marking time not in hours, but in waves of nausea and clarity. The canyon that was meant to be her tomb became her crucible, its indifferent stone her only witness. She was found by a ghost, or rather, a man who had made himself one. Elias Gable had fled civilization a decade earlier. A former trauma surgeon from a prestigious city hospital, he had retreated to this remote corner of the world after a tragic malpractice suit destroyed his career and his family. He now lived in a stone and timber cabin, miles from any marked trail, a recluse haunted by the lives he couldn't save. He had been foraging for medicinal herbs along the creek bed when his dog, a grizzled blue heeler, caught a scent. He found her then, a crumpled heap of humanity that had somehow, miraculously, survived a fall that should have been fatal. There was no surprise in his weathered face, only a weary resignation. He saw not a person, but a problem of physiology and triage. With hands that remembered the delicate cartography of the human body, he fashioned a splint from sturdy branches and strips of his own shirt. He administered a tincture of wild poppy he kept for his own chronic pain, the bitter liquid a small mercy on her tongue. He carried her back to his cabin, his movements economical and sure, his silence as profound as the canyon itself. Her recovery was brutal. Elias set her leg with a surgeon's precision, cleaned her wounds, and fed her broth until she could stomach solid food. The cabin was a sanctuary of quiet order, filled with books on medicine, engineering, and philosophy. It was the monastery of a fallen monk, a place where knowledge was revered, but the world was held at bay. There were nights she awoke screaming, not from the physical pain, but from the memory of the push. The betrayal was a poison that lingered long after the wounds had begun to scar over. "Who did this to you, child?" Elias asked one evening, his voice raspy from disuse as he tended the fire in the stone hearth. Her own voice was a hoarse whisper, but the words, once uncorked, flowed out in a torrent. She told him everything: the love, the lies, the theft of her life's work, the betrayal at Sovereign's crest. Elias listened without judgment, his weathered face grim, the firelight dancing in eyes that had seen too much of human cruelty. When she was finished, he went to a locked trunk in the corner and pulled out a satellite phone and a small solar charger. "I keep this for emergencies," he said, placing it on the small wooden table beside her cot. "You can call the authorities, tell them what happened." A bitter, broken laugh escaped Ilara's lips, turning into a painful cough. "And say what? The billionaire heir to Prescott Industries tried to kill me? He has the best lawyers money can buy. He's already erased me, Elias. My name is probably all over the news as a tragic accident. He'll paint me as a heartbroken woman who took her own life. No one would believe me." She was right. A week later, using the satellite phone's limited internet access, she found the digital tombstones. Tech heiress Ilara Finch feared dead in tragic hiking accident. The articles were filled with quotes from a grief-stricken Corbyn, who spoke eloquently of her recent bouts of depression and instability. He had laid the groundwork perfectly. The world mourned the fragile, brilliant girl he had invented. And in the business section of the Wall Street Journal, another headline: Corbyn Prescott unveils groundbreaking AI, Ethereus, secures landmark merger with D'Amico Global. He was being hailed as the next visionary. He had won. As she stared at the glowing screen, something shifted inside her. A fire hotter and more intense than any physical pain she had endured began to burn in her soul. It wasn't the wild, chaotic flame of grief. It was a cold, hard flame of pure, unadulterated rage. Ilara Finch was dead. She had to be. But the woman who survived the fall would not be a victim. She would be a reckoning. The wilderness became her forge, and pain, her hammer. For the next 4 years, the canyon that was meant to be her grave became her monastery and her training ground. The seasons turned, marked by the blooming of desert marigolds and the coming of the winter snows that dusted the high mesas. Each sunrise was a promise, not of hope, but of purpose. Vengeance was no longer a desire. It was the elemental force that drove her heart to beat. Her body, once broken, was rebuilt. The long, agonizing hikes to regain her strength, taken first with a crude crutch and then under her own power, turned her lean and resilient. She helped Elias chop wood and maintain his off-grid cabin, her hands, once soft from typing code, becoming calloused and strong. She learned the rhythms of the wild, how to read the clouds for a coming storm, how to find water, how to move silently through the brush. The desert, with its stark beauty and brutal honesty, stripped away the last vestiges of the trusting, naive woman she had been. It taught her that survival was not a given, it was an act of relentless will. But her mind was where the true transformation took place. Elias Gable's cabin was an unlikely library of Alexandria. His books were not just relics of his past life, but tools for his solitude. Using his extensive collection of medical, engineering, and philosophy texts, and the precious hours of internet access from the satellite phone, she educated herself relentlessly. She was no longer just a programmer, she became a predator of information. She studied corporate law, devouring the intricacies of mergers and acquisitions, learning the legal architecture of the world Corbin inhabited. She delved into cybersecurity, not as a builder, but as a saboteur, becoming a ghost in the machine who could dance through firewalls undetected. She devoured philosophy, from Sun Tzu to Marcus Aurelius, learning strategy, patience, and the art of emotional control. She read medical journals on physiology and psychology, learning the mechanics of fear and the subtle triggers that governed human behavior. She shed the skin of Elara Finch, cell by painful cell. In her place, a new woman was born. She chose the name Lyra Kane. Lyra, for the constellation, a collection of distant, burning stars forming a single, powerful image. Kane, a name that echoed with the resonance of a primal transgression, a stark reminder of the blood debt she was owed. The world outside moved on. Corbin Prescott's star ascended. Aetherius was integrated into global finance, hailed as a work of singular genius. His marriage to Serafina D'Amico was the social event of the decade, a union of power and influence that solidified his empire. He was lauded, celebrated, untouchable. Lyra watched it all from her remote outpost, the news reports and magazine articles fueling the cold fire within her. She studied his interviews, his public appearances, learning the cadence of his lies, the tells in his confident facade. He was building his kingdom on her bones, and she would be the earthquake that brought it all down. Elias watched her transformation with a quiet, sorrowful understanding. He had saved a life, but he knew he had also midwifed the birth of a weapon. He taught her what he could, how to suture a wound, how to remain calm under pressure, how to observe the world with a diagnostician's dispassionate eye. "Vengeance is a hollow pursuit, child," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "It consumes the vessel that holds it. It's not hollow if it's all you have left," Lyra replied, her voice low and steady, her eyes reflecting the flames. "He didn't just try to kill me, Elias. He tried to unwrite me. He stole my name, my work, my life. This isn't about feeling better, it's about balancing the books. It's about justice." On the 4th anniversary of her fall, she stood before him, no longer a broken girl, but a woman of formidable presence. Her hair, once a soft brown, was cut short and dyed a raven black. Her eyes held a chilling intensity, and her posture radiated a confidence that was harder than steel. "I'm ready," she said. Elias looked at her, a flicker of sadness in his eyes for the girl she had been, but immense pride for the woman she had become. "You're going back to their world. It's a viper's nest." "I know," Lyra replied, a faint, cold smile touching her lips. "But this time, I'll be the serpent." She left the mountains with a new name, a new face, and a singular, all-consuming purpose. The physical transformation was the easiest part. a back-alley plastic surgeon in a dusty border town in Mexico, paid with the first significant earnings from her online stock trading, made subtle alterations. A slight change to the bridge of her nose, a sharpening of her jawline, enough to render her unrecognizable to a casual glance, but not so much as to create a mask. The face that looked back at her from a cracked motel mirror was that of a stranger. Her eyes, the only familiar territory. They were colder, harder, like chips of obsidian. Her seed fund was modest, but growing. Using a rudimentary version of Ethereus she could run from memory and a cheap, encrypted laptop, she began day trading. She exploited the micro-patterns in the market, the digital ghosts of the very system Corbin was now lauded for mastering. She turned a few $1,000s into a respectable war chest. Each successful trade, a small, satisfying act of reclamation. She was taking back what was hers, one bite and $1 at a time. Her target was not Corbin, not yet. To strike at a king, you do not charge the castle gates. You find his most powerful enemy and offer him a sharper sword. In the world of tech and finance, there was only one name that made Corbin Prescott flinch: Reese Falconer. Reese Falconer was everything Corbin pretended to be. Where Corbin was flashy charm, Reese was quiet intensity. Where Corbin inherited an empire, Reese had built his from scratch. Falconer Dynamics, a lean and innovative energy and tech conglomerate, was the bane of Prescott Industries' existence. Reese consistently outmaneuvered his older, more bloated rival with a combination of ruthless efficiency and visionary foresight. He was an enigma. A self-made billionaire before 30, he was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his interviews were models of terse, brilliant insight. He was a shark in a sea of dolphins, and Lyra knew he was the only man who hated Corbin Prescott enough to help her. His animosity was well documented, a fierce corporate rivalry that often spilled over into public proxy battles. But Lyra suspected it was more than just business. Men like Reese Falconer weren't driven by profit alone. They were driven by conviction, or by a wound far deeper. Getting to him was the challenge. He was insulated by layers of security and gatekeepers. A frontal approach was impossible. So Lyra laid a trap, not for the man, but for his intellectual curiosity. Operating as Kane Analytics, a one-woman boutique firm based out of a sleek, anonymous virtual office, she began publishing a series of astonishingly insightful white papers on market vulnerabilities. She didn't release them to the public, but to a curated, high-level subscription list she knew his top analysts monitored. She targeted industries where Falconer Dynamics and Prescott Industries were in direct competition. Her analyses were brilliant, her predictions unnervingly accurate. In one paper, she deconstructed Prescott Industries' latest acquisition, exposing a fatal flaw in their due diligence that would cost them millions. She published it 2 weeks before their stock took a nosedive. The whispers started in the upper echelons of the financial world. Who was this Kane? The name began appearing on the internal watch lists of every major firm. Lyra knew a mind like Reese Falconer's fed on data and patterns. She made sure her work was irresistible. Her final paper was her masterstroke. It was a theoretical model for a decentralized energy grid powered by a predictive AI, an elegant, superior application of the core principles of her original Ethereus project, redesigned to be unassailable. It was also a direct and existential threat to the centralized model Prescott Industries was building its future on. She didn't just point out a flaw, she offered a blueprint for his enemy's triumph. She sent this last paper directly to Reese Falconer's encrypted personal inbox, a feat of cyber sleuthing that was in itself a calling card. The call came 2 days later, an encrypted number, a voice like gravel and silk. "This is Reese Falconer." There was no preamble. "I've read your work on energy decentralization. It's either the most brilliant thing I've seen in a decade, or it's fantastically flawed. I can't decide which. A beat of silence. My jet is at Midway. Be on it in 2 hours. I want to meet the mind behind these papers. He hung up before she could reply. Lyra felt a jolt of pure, cold adrenaline. The bait had been taken. The game had begun. She met him in the penthouse of the Blackwood Tower in Seattle, a space of stark, minimalist design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling tapestry of light and shadow against the dark waters of the Puget Sound. The room was a reflection of the man himself, powerful, precise, and devoid of unnecessary sentiment. Reese Falconer was taller than she expected, dressed in a simple black sweater and dark jeans that did little to hide the formidable physique of a man who clearly channeled his stress into physical discipline. His most striking feature was his eyes, a startlingly pale gray, the color of a winter sky, and they analyzed her with an unnerving, predatory focus. He didn't offer to shake her hand. "Lyra Kane," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb the silence in the room. "You're younger than I pictured. Good ideas aren't bound by age, Mr. Falconer," she replied coolly, meeting his gaze without flinching. She had spent 4 years preparing for a confrontation, and she would not be intimidated now. This was not a job interview, it was an audition for an alliance. For the next hour, he grilled her. It was a relentless intellectual assault. He attacked her thesis from every conceivable angle, searching for weaknesses, for hubris, for any sign that she was a fraud. He was a master of this world, and he wielded his knowledge like a scalpel, dissecting her arguments, probing for their limits. Lyra met every challenge with calm, irrefutable logic. She not only defended her work, but expanded on it, demonstrating a depth of understanding that finally, subtly, shifted the dynamic in the room. The interrogation became a conversation, then a theoretical sparring match. A flicker of something akin to respect began to thaw the ice in his pale grey eyes. He was visibly impressed. "Your work consistently targets one company," he finally stated, leaning back in his chair, his focus narrowing. "Prescott Industries. You seem to have a particular interest in their vulnerabilities." This was the moment, the opening she had engineered. They're a bloated, over-leveraged company coasting on a single, stolen idea, Lyra said, her voice laced with ice. "That makes them a perfect case study for market failure." Reese's eyes narrowed. The air in the room crackled with a sudden tension. "Stolen? That's a heavy accusation. Aetherius has made Corbin Prescott the darling of the tech world. She had to give him something real, something that would anchor her incredible story in a truth he could not dismiss. She had to transform herself from a brilliant consultant into an indispensable asset. "I know it's stolen," Lyra said, her voice dropping slightly, allowing a sliver of the raw emotion she kept so tightly controlled to surface. "Because I'm the one who wrote the original code." She watched him process this, saw the flicker of disbelief warring with the cold logic of what he had seen in her work. He was a man who trusted data, and the data of her intellect was undeniable. The pieces fit, her obsession with Prescott, the uncanny depth of her insight into his technology. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice now a quiet, sharp demand. "My name was Alara Finch." She told him a carefully curated version of the story. She spoke of a brilliant young programmer, a manipulative fiancé, the theft of her life's work, and a faked death that allowed him to take all the credit. She framed it as a story of corporate espionage and betrayal, a narrative he would understand. It was business. She omitted the push, the fall, the years with Elias. The attempted murder was a truth too raw, too personal to share. Not yet. When she finished, the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the city below. Reese stared out at the lights, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists on the arms of his chair. "I knew Orson Prescott," he said finally, his voice laced with a cold, personal bitterness that surprised her. "Corbin's father. My father was his partner years ago. They built the foundations of that company together." He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw the wound he carried. "Orson cheated him, pushed him out with nothing, and left my family ruined. The stress of it killed him. I was 16. Lyra stared at him, stunned. This was a twist she could never have predicted. His rivalry with the Prescotts wasn't just business, it was a deeply personal vendetta. He rose from his chair and walked over to the wet bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to her. "It seems our interests are aligned, Miss Kane," he said, his pale eyes boring into hers. For the first time, she saw not just a predator, but an ally. A man who understood on a visceral level what it meant to have everything taken by a Prescott. "Corbin Prescott isn't just a rival to me," he said, a chilling promise in his voice. "He is a legacy I intend to dismantle, piece by piece. You've just provided me with the perfect blueprint." He raised his glass. "Welcome to Falconer Dynamics," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Let's go ruin Corbin Prescott's life." The alliance between Lyra Kane and Reese Falconer was forged in the cold fire of mutual purpose. Their partnership was not one of tender glances and soft words, but of late-night strategy sessions fueled by black coffee and vengeance. Their shared intellect sparking like flint on steel, Reese gave Lyra the resources and the platform she needed, the vast, powerful machinery of his corporation. In return, she gave him the one thing he lacked, an insider's map to Corbin Prescott's mind. Their campaign began not with a cannon blast, but with 1,000 cuts. Under the guise of a new, aggressive R&D initiative at Falconer Dynamics, Lyra began systematically poaching key talent from Prescott Industries. She knew exactly who the truly brilliant, underappreciated engineers and data scientists were, the ones Corbin took for granted, the ones whose names never appeared in the press releases. She didn't just offer them more money, she offered them the one thing Corbin never could: intellectual respect and the chance to work on a project that would eclipse Aetherius. One by one, Prescott's best minds quietly resigned and reappeared on the Falconer payroll. Next, they targeted Prescott's supply chain. Lyra knew Corbin's operational weaknesses, his habit of cutting corners on component sourcing for short-term gains. She and Reese orchestrated a series of targeted, surgical acquisitions of the smaller, critical suppliers that Prescott Industries relied on. It was a silent siege. Production bottlenecks began to appear, delaying the much-hyped launch of their next-gen Aetherius 2 platform. The market, once infatuated, grew restless. Corbin's reputation as a flawless innovator began to tarnish at the edges. But it was the psychological warfare where Lyra truly excelled. She began to haunt Corbin, a ghost from a past he believed was buried under 500 feet of rock. It started subtly. An anonymous, encrypted email would arrive in his private inbox containing a single line of code, a unique, elegant string she had written years ago, a digital fingerprint he would surely recognize. He'd trace it, of course, but the signal would bounce through a dozen proxy servers from Estonia to Brazil before vanishing into the ether. Then, at a lavish charity gala celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Prescott-D'Amico merger, Lyra made a more audacious move. She knew Corbin's wife, Serafina, had a penchant for rare orchids. Working through a third-party florist, Lyra had a single, perfect star of Bethlehem orchid delivered to their table. It was the same, unassuming flower Ilara used to keep in a vase on her desk, the one Corbin had once called unremarkable. Tucked into the petals was a small, embossed card with no name, just a date printed in simple, elegant script, the date he had pushed her off the cliff. Lyra wasn't there, but she didn't need to be. Reese had an operative at the event, a society photographer on his payroll. Later that night, in their war room, she watched the footage. She saw Corbin's face pale as he read the card, his confident facade cracking for a brief, beautiful moment of pure, undiluted panic. She saw him scan the crowd, his eyes wild, with a paranoia he couldn't explain to his quizzical wife. He was a man seeing a ghost in broad daylight, and the prison of his own guilt was beginning to take shape around him. As their professional relationship deepened, something else began to grow between Lyra and Reese. It was an unspoken understanding, a bond forged in shared wounds. She saw past the ruthless billionaire to the man who worked with a ferocious loyalty to his team, who remembered the names of his janitors, and who spoke of his late father with a quiet, profound grief. He, in turn, saw the fire and resilience beneath her icy control. He saw the scars she tried to hide, not as a weakness, but as a testament to her strength. One night, they were working late in his office, mapping out a plan to disrupt Prescott's bid for a massive government defense contract. Lyra was exhausted, staring at a complex flowchart until the lines blurred. "You never talk about it," Reese said suddenly, his voice soft, cutting through the silence. "What it was like. The years you were gone." Lyra tensed. It was a territory she never allowed anyone to enter. "There's nothing to talk about. I survived. I planned." "That's not what I mean," he said, turning his chair to face her. "You can build firewalls and plot corporate takeovers, but you've built the highest walls around yourself. Who was Ilara Finch?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Not what happened to her, but who was she? A tear she hadn't anticipated welled in her eye, and she angrily wiped it away. "She was a fool," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with self-loathing. "She was naive and trusting, and she paid the price for it." Reese rose and walked over to her, stopping just before her chair. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "From what I've gathered," he said, his voice a low counterpoint to her pain, "she was brilliant. She was passionate. And the fact that you're here tonight means she was a fighter. You didn't just erase her, Lyra. You honored her by becoming strong enough to fight for her." His words pierced through her armor in a way no corporate attack ever could. He wasn't just using her as a weapon against his enemy. He saw the woman behind the revenge plot. In that moment, surrounded by the cold glass and steel of his empire, Lyra felt the first flicker of a warmth she thought had died forever in the Arizona canyon. A dangerous, terrifying, and undeniably real connection to the man who had become her unlikely partner in vengeance. Corbin Prescott was living in a gilded cage of his own making, and the bars were beginning to rattle. On the surface, his life was perfect. He was the celebrated visionary of Prescott Industries, married to the beautiful and powerful Serafina D'Amico, his face gracing the cover of Forbes as the man who invented tomorrow. But beneath the polished veneer, a cancer of paranoia was metastasizing. The anonymous threats, the whispers from his past, were escalating. He received a package at his office, delivered by a secure courier. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a small, weathered piece of granite, identical to the rock from the cliffside at Sovereign's Crest. There was no note, none was needed. His multi-million-dollar smart home, secured by his own company's technology, began to glitch in unnerving ways. The thermostat would plummet to near-freezing temperatures in the middle of the night. The sound system would play a faint, melancholic piano piece, a simple melody Ilara had composed years ago before abruptly stopping. His tech team found nothing, no trace of a breach. It was as if the house itself was haunted by her memory. He confided in his oldest friend and Prescott Industries COO, Marcus Thorne, no relation to Lyra's chosen surname, a bitter coincidence that did not escape Corbyn's notice. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," Corbyn confessed one night over a glass of scotch in his office, the glittering skyline of Viridian Springs spread out below them. "It's her. I know it. Island. She's alive, Marcus, and she's torturing me." Marcus, a pragmatic and steadying influence, was skeptical. "Corbyn, it's grief, guilt. It's playing tricks on you. Ilara is gone. We both saw the reports. This is what happens when a tragedy isn't properly processed." But Corbyn couldn't shake the chilling feeling of being watched. He began to see her everywhere, a flash of dark hair in a crowd, a woman with a similar posture across a restaurant. His obsession with the mysterious consultant, Lyra Kane, intensified. Her strategies against him were too precise, too personal. She knew which divisions were vulnerable, which executives were disloyal. It was as if she had access to his own thoughts, his own playbook. His paranoia finally boiled over when Falconer Dynamics outbid him for the lucrative Department of Defense Aegis cybersecurity contract. It wasn't just a financial loss, it was a public humiliation. The deciding factor, according to the press release, was a superior, more adaptive security protocol designed by Reese Falconer's new star strategist, Lyra Kane. Corbyn decided he had to meet this woman, to look into her eyes and see the truth for himself. He arranged a confrontation under the guise of a potential truce, inviting her to a neutral location, a private, members-only club in downtown Viridian Springs. Lyra walked in, the picture of calm, cool professionalism. She saw the desperation behind Corbyn's forced smile, the dark circles under his eyes. He looked haunted. "Miss Kane," he began, his voice strained, "your success has been remarkable. I'm here to propose a different kind of partnership. There's no reason Falconer and Prescott can't coexist. In fact, I'd be willing to make you an offer to join my team. An offer that would make Mr. Falconer's look insulting." Lyra gave a small, chilling smile. "I'm not interested in your money, Mr. Prescott. I'm interested in your work, Aetherius, for example. Such a fascinating piece of technology. It seems almost prescient, as if it came from a mind with a singular, passionate vision." Every word was a carefully chosen scalpel, slicing through his composure. Corbyn flinched. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "How do you know my business so intimately?" "I'm just a student of the market," Lyra replied, her eyes like chips of ice. "And I've learned that true visionaries are rare. Most are just thieves, standing on the shoulders of ghosts." He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the glasses. "It's you, isn't it, Ilara? This is some sick game you're playing, but how did you survive?" Lyra leaned forward, her expression unreadable, a mask of cold inquiry. "Ilara Finch died on a mountain 4 years ago. You said so yourself. She was unstable, depressed, a tragic footnote in your triumphant story." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Are you saying you lied, Corbyn?" She had him trapped. To admit she was, Ilara was to admit he'd lied about her death, which would raise questions he couldn't possibly answer. He was cornered, his face a mask of fury and terror. He stormed out of the club, leaving Lyra to calmly finish her water. The first crack in his empire had become a fissure. The final piece of her own emotional puzzle fell into place that same week. Through a deep-dive hack into Prescott Industries' old servers, she was looking for financial leverage, but found something far more painful. An encrypted email chain between Corbyn and her former best friend, Brenna Foster. They were dated the week before the trip to the canyon. Brenna, consumed by a quiet, venomous jealousy of Ilara's talent and her relationship with Corbyn, had been feeding him information. She told him about Ilara's private insecurities, her fears, even helping him craft the narrative of her instability should anyone ask questions. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just Corbyn's. It was Brenna's hand holding the dagger with him. The email that broke her heart read, "She's never been good enough for you, Cor. You deserve someone who stands beside you, not in front of you. Do what you have to do. I'll take care of things here." Lyra stared at the screen, the old wound of her friend's betrayal reopening. But this time, the pain didn't cripple her. It hardened her resolve into diamond. She now knew that her revenge couldn't just be about Corbyn. It had to be a complete cleansing, a razing of the entire rotten structure of lies her old life had been built upon. And she knew exactly how to light the match. The stage for Corbyn Prescott's downfall was set to be his greatest triumph. The Global Technology Symposium, held at the sprawling new Hudson Yards Convention Center in New York City. The keynote address was the most coveted spot in the tech world, and this year it belonged to him. He was scheduled to unveil Ethereus 2, a platform he promised would integrate into every aspect of modern life, from finance to national security. It was the culmination of everything he had stolen, and he intended it to be his coronation as the undisputed king of technology. In the weeks leading up to the event, Lyra and Rhys worked in a state of synchronized, relentless focus. Their war room in the Blackwood Tower was a chaotic collage of network diagrams, financial projections, and legal documents. They were not just planning a corporate takedown, they were preparing for a public execution. Rhys handled the financial assault. In the 72 hours before the symposium, he would initiate a coordinated series of short sales on Prescott Industries stock, using Lyra's predictive models to exploit vulnerabilities they had spent months creating. He would leak anonymous, verifiable evidence of Prescott's accounting irregularities to key reporters at the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, timed to publish the morning of the keynote. The goal was to have Corbyn walk onto that stage as his company's stock was in freefall. Lyra's role was more surgical, more personal. She was the ghost in the machine. She had discovered that the entire symposium, including the live-streamed keynote, was being run on a network secured by Prescott Industries' own software. It was a demonstration of arrogant confidence, and it would be his undoing. With a backdoor she had built using her intimate, foundational knowledge of the system's architecture, she would have complete control over every screen, every microphone, and every light in that auditorium. Her final piece of evidence was her trump card. During her years with Elias, she had painstakingly reconstructed her original Ethereus code from memory, embedding a unique digital signature within its core, a complex cryptographic key that spelled out her name and the date of its true completion. It was an unbreakable, unduplicable watermark. Corbyn, in his haste to claim the work as his own, had simply built upon her foundation. Her signature was still there, buried deep within the code of Ethereus 2.0, a ticking time bomb he didn't even know existed. The night before the symposium, a rare quiet settled over the war room. The plans were set, the dominoes were aligned. Rhys found Lyra standing by the window, looking down at the city lights, a sea of infinite possibilities. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. "I've been ready for 4 years," she replied, though her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. This was for more than revenge. It was for the woman she was, the life that was stolen from her. It was reclamation. He came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, calming anchor in the storm of her thoughts. "After tomorrow, everything changes," he said. "The world will know who you are. There's no going back to being Lyra Kane." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "I don't know who I'll be. Ilara Finch is a ghost. Lyra Kane is a weapon. I'm not sure what's left." Rhys reached out, and for the first time took her hand. His touch was warm, firm, a stark contrast to the cold purpose that had driven her for so long. What's left is a brilliant, strong woman who survived the unthinkable, he said, his pale grey eyes filled with an intensity that had nothing to do with business or revenge. And whatever name you choose, I'll be standing right beside you. In that moment, the future, which had for so long been a dark fog of vengeance, cleared. She saw a glimmer of something beyond the fire and the fury, a possibility, a life. She squeezed his hand, her own resolve solidifying into a calm, unbreakable certainty. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady and clear, "Corbin Prescott will introduce the world to his greatest creation. He just doesn't realize it's me." The cavernous main hall of the Hudson Yards Convention Center was a cathedral of modern capitalism. A congregation of 3,000 souls, journalists, investors, and tech luminaries had gathered for the sermon of the year, to be delivered by their new messiah, Corbin Prescott. The air hummed with a palpable energy, a mixture of reverence and ravenous ambition. Backstage, in the cool, sterile white of the VIP green room, Corbin felt the familiar thrum of adoration through the walls. He was adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit when his father, Orson Prescott, placed a heavy, proprietary hand on his shoulder. Orson, a man whose face was a roadmap of ruthless corporate battles, looked at his son's reflection in the mirror, his eyes gleaming with dynastic pride. "The reports this morning were a nuisance," Orson said, his voice a low gravel. "Falconer's pathetic attempt to rattle the cage before the lion emerges. Ignore it. Today, you don't just sell a product, you cement a legacy, our legacy." "He's already forgotten," Corbin replied, with a dismissive smirk, exuding a confidence that was absolute. He truly believed it. The whispers of a ghost named Elora, the market jitters, the phantom glitches, they were the inconsequential buzz of insects against the windscreen of his ascent. High above them, in a darkened network operations center, Lyra had commandeered on a sub-level of the convention center. The atmosphere was vastly different. It was a theater of war. Lyra sat before a glowing trident of monitors, the undisputed commander of the digital battlefield she had engineered. Reese stood behind her, his formidable presence a silent bastion of support. She closed her eyes for a single, final moment, shutting out the glow of the screens. In the darkness, she saw the canyon. She felt the cold stone, the searing pain, the suffocating loneliness. She saw the face of Elias Gable, the gruff angel who had saved her. Every ounce of that pain, every drop of that effort had led her to this chair, to this keyboard. Reese's hand rested gently on her shoulder, a brief, grounding touch. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice a low murmur, meant only for her, "you've already won." She opened her eyes. The ghost of the canyon was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. "No," she replied, her fingers finding their home position on the keyboard. "Winning is making sure he knows why he's lost." The stage lights blazed to life. A masterful video montage painted a glorious picture of a world perfected by Aetherius II. Then the music reached its zenith, and Corbin Prescott walked into the spotlight. The applause was a physical force, a wave of adulation that he rode to the center of the stage. He began to speak, his voice resonating with a practiced, messianic fervor. "For years, I have been working in silence, sacrificing everything to paint a new reality for humanity. Aetherius II is not a product. It is my soul rendered in code. It is the culmination of my singular vision." As he spoke, Lyra initiated the first sequence. On the colossal panoramic screen behind him, his confident, smiling face flickered. It vanished, replaced instantly by a studio-quality photograph of a vibrant, happy Elara Finch, her arm linked with his, a brilliant smile on her face. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. In the front row, Serafina D'Amico's poised smile faltered. Corbin, his back to the screen, felt the shift in the room's energy. He turned, and his blood ran cold. He stared at the face of the woman he had sent plunging into darkness, her image now 50 feet high, a silent, judging god. "A tribute," he stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre, "to a brilliant mind lost too soon." He turned to the tech booth, his eyes blazing with silent, panicked fury. "Change it." But his microphone went dead, and a new voice, a woman's voice, impossibly clear, perfectly modulated, and filled with an arctic calm seized control of the auditorium's sound system. "He calls it a tribute," the voice declared, as the screen split to reveal a live feed of Lyra in her command center. "I call it an obituary for a life he thought he had extinguished." The room exploded. People were on their feet, phones held aloft. This was no glitch. This was an attack. "My name is Ilara Finch," she said, her gaze boring into the camera. "And Corbin Prescott is a liar, a thief, and a murderer." The accusation, so blunt and brutal, silenced the hall. "He told you he created Aetherius," her voice narrated, as the screen behind Corbin changed again, now showing a side-by-side code comparison. "The truth is, he wouldn't know how to write a single line of its foundational architecture. Allow me to demonstrate." She was relentless. She showed the identical code structures, the proprietary algorithms. She played the audio of his panicked 911 call, the manufactured grief in his voice now sounding grotesque and obscene. Then came the emails between him and Brenna Foster, a blueprint of his betrayal. For the final, undeniable blow, Ilara let the silence hang for a beat. "Every artist signs their work," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. "I signed mine." On the screen, inside the complex guts of Aetherius 2, a diagnostic program initiated. Lines of code parted like a digital sea, revealing a deeply embedded, encrypted string. Slowly, deliberately, the string unscrambled itself, rearranging into glowing, irrefutable text that burned itself into the memory of everyone watching. Ilara Finch, July 14, 2021. Checkmate. Corbin Prescott collapsed. Not his body, but his soul. He physically crumpled inward, the tailored suit suddenly looking like a costume on a broken mannequin. As two NYPD detectives calmly walked onto the stage, their badges gleaming in the spotlights, his eyes met the live feed of Ilara one last time. He saw no fire, no hatred. He saw only the serene, implacable face of justice. As the detectives cuffed him, leading his unresponsive form off the stage, Ilara cut the feed. The screens went black. The house lights came up, revealing a scene of utter pandemonium. In the control room, Ilara finally let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 4 years. She leaned back, her body trembling with the release of a tension that had become a part of her. Reese's hands came to rest on her shoulders, strong and steady. "It's done," he said softly. Weeks later, the dust had begun to settle. The name Prescott was now synonymous with disgrace. Ilara stood with Reese on the balcony of his Seattle penthouse. The night was cool, the city below a glittering promise. The war was over, but the silence of peace felt unfamiliar, vast. "For 4 years, I had one purpose," she said, her voice quiet, "to burn it all down. Now, I don't know who I am without the fight." He turned to her, taking her hands in his. His touch was no longer just grounding, it was an invitation. "You're not the fire anymore, Ilara. You're the architect, the one who builds things." Your revenge wasn't just about destruction, It was about creating a truth where there were only lies. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. We both know what it's like to live in the shadow of a great wrong. But we don't have to stay there. He squeezed her hands gently. We're starting the Falconer Finch Foundation. Its mission will be about second chances, about finding those brilliant minds who have been cheated, silenced, or pushed aside, and giving them the resources to rise up. She looked up at him, and for the first time in a long, long time, she saw a future that wasn't defined by her past. She saw a partner. She saw a life beyond survival. She had been cheated and left for dead, a ghost haunting the man who had wronged her. But now, standing here, she was no longer a ghost. She was a phoenix, fully risen, ready to see what it felt like to fly.